So, Strange New Worlds Season 2 has come to a close, and it continues its trend of being an immensely frustrating show, continually coming close to greatness but never quite reaching it. Except for Episode 4. Episode 4 was perfect. Look, TNG took 2 seasons to really find its footing. Maybe the next season of Stranger Worlds will really blow me away. I truly hope it does. But for now, I'm left with the season finale, which was once again about the Gorn. This isn't a very rational, critical reading, but I just hate the Gorn in this show. I cannot stand them. Everything about the way they're executed to the way they're done is just pure schlock, and I cannot stand it. But I'm me. I can't just leave it at that. I can't just blindly hate something. I need to understand why. I need to be able to back up my arguments. So why don't you join me as we unpack everything wrong with Strange New Worlds and their transformation of the big lizard man into a xenomorph. I'm going to start this with a disclaimer that I'm a massive coward who can't do horror. Specifically, I cannot handle body horror of any kind. And as such, I've never watched Alien and probably never will. Everything I know about the xenomorph is just from cultural osmosis. But, it's one of the most famous monsters in movie history, so I know all the stuff. Facehuggers, acid blood, chest bursters, queens, something about big muscular blue guys. Actually, that part I have no idea. But I know enough to say that obviously the Gorn in Strange New Worlds are xenomorphs, from the way they move, to their life cycle process, to the way that they're filmed. That's obviously what they're going for. And because they're doing body horror, I'm predisposed to not enjoy any episode with the Gorn because I don't like body horror. I'm not going to suggest that Star Trek should never do horror, that would be silly. Star Trek has over the years provided some of the most terrifying monsters in cinema history. I know they're basically a joke now, but the Borg would have absolutely terrified me as a kid. Or, the episode where Barclay turns into a half-spider monster. Or these frickin' guys in Enterprise. I don't have to, or expect to, like every single episode of Star Trek. That's the inherent advantage of serialized television. If you don't like an episode, you can come back next week for one that you'll probably enjoy more. With all that being said, I don't think that the Xenogorn succeed in doing what it is they're trying to do, because I'm not all that scared of them, and I'm a massive coward, so that's quite impressive. Part of this is because it doesn't matter how creepy you make them. When you say Gorn, this is the first image that will always pop into my head. But the other part is that they're just inherently ridiculous. They've taken the original idea of the Gorn as a warmongering race of lizard men, and combined it with xenomorphs in a way that just does not make sense. Let's think about this logically for a second. The Gorn reproduce by spitting on people and impregnating them with their eggs. Gross, but okay. Now, how the hell did they survive long enough to build spaceships? We know from Lan's backstory that they have breeding planets where they kidnap people to have them be impregnated by their offspring or eaten by them. Gross, but what did they do before that on their own home planet? Does the host have to be humanoid? Can they spit on and impregnate each other? Does the host still die when they do that? Because with that, and the fact that they instantly kill each other as soon as they're born, I think Darwin would condemn this species to death. If high school taught me anything, it's that the driver of all civilization is this glorious little thing called agriculture. It's pretty much unbelievable that the Gorn could make it to space without a sustainable system for repopulation. They had to survive somehow before they were able to kidnap other aliens. And if they have that system, how is kidnapping random colonists possibly a more efficient system than what they already have? The Xenogorn only make sense to exist in a world where they already have spaceships, because they can't be kidnapping colonists to reproduce before they have spaceships with which to do the kidnapping. If they're intelligent enough to build spaceships, then they're intelligent enough to figure out that kidnapping and murder-raping your neighbours is not a sustainable way to grow your civilization. This isn't a problem with xenomorphs because the aliens in Alien are never depicted as being a civilization. They don't build spaceships and colonize planets, they're animals. They're intelligent, sure, but in the way that bees are intelligent. They know how to survive, not advanced engineering. It's not that an alien species with this life cycle couldn't sustain themselves. If, for example, they had human farms where they bred humans to be incubators, then sure, that would be awful, but it would be sustainable. But you can't grow a hegemony on kidnappings alone. It's the old Klingon problem taken to extreme scale. A race of evil monsters who kill each other on a whim simply do not make sense as a spacefaring empire. The show wants to have a credible political opponent that the Federation could theoretically end up at war with, while also having big scary monsters, and it never reconciles the fact that these two ideas are completely at odds with one another. So yeah, you can make the Gorn as visually scary as you want, you can have lots of jump scares and gore, but none of this will disguise the fact that they are a fundamentally ridiculous antagonist that, if you're actually trying to think about, don't make any sense. And this is Star Trek. You shouldn't be punished for thinking things through. So that's problem 1. The Gorn don't make any sense. Problem 2 is that whenever they show up, they fundamentally alter the philosophy of the show. A pretty baseline philosophy of Star Trek since the original series is that war is bad. Duh. There are at this point several dozen episodes about this. There was even an extremely direct one about it this season that has its own problems, but that's not the point. War should be avoided at all costs. Sometimes it's inevitable, but you should always try and find a better way. That's literally the point of the original Gorn episode of TOS.
No, I won't kill him. Do you hear? You'll have to get your entertainment someplace else.
In Strange New Worlds, they murder Gorn babies without a second thought. Because of course they do. They're monsters. You don't negotiate with the bear when it's trying to kill you. You shoot it.
The Federation teaches that if we can find a way to empathize with an enemy, then they can one day become our friends. They're wrong. Some things in this universe are just plain evil.
This exact quote is so telling of how the Gorn are used in this show, because this is the exact thing that you would have a character say before they have an emotional journey and learn to empathise with the enemy. It's the kind of bold, sweeping claim that someone who's been through a traumatic experience, like La'an, would say. But that doesn't mean that they're correct. You can't judge an entire race by the actions of some. That's a pretty basic message. Except for the fact that Strange New Worlds has yet to lay out the counter-argument. As far as the show is concerned, La'an is correct. The Gorn are irredeemable monsters. I mentioned the kidnap, murder, rape, right? Fuck these guys. Kill them all! That's a bizarre thing to take away from an episode of Star Trek, but in every appearance so far, it's been the only takeaway. This is kind of the issue when you write an enemy that's just fundamentally evil. You can't negotiate, you can't surrender, they're a parasite who kills the host. The only solution is to kill them first. The very setup of the Gorn in the show means that La'an can never be corrected. Point of fact, it would be pretty insulting to the audience at this point if she was. You're telling me to sympathise with the guys who kidnap people to grow their eggs inside? The guys who killed Hemmer? No thanks.
I think it's safe to say that we don't understand the Gorn.
Well, I've seen them up close and personal, and they're not hard to understand, Bob. They're monsters.
Monster's a word to describe those who don't understand us.
And sometimes a monster's just a monster.
Okay, all of this is a bit strange, but this is not the first time that Star Trek has thrown an enemy like this at the Federation. It's an interesting question to ask. What do these enlightened people do when faced with an enemy who will not bend to their ideals? Basically half of Deep Space Nine is about this with the Dominion War, and then there's the even more direct comparison, the Borg.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
The Borg are the ultimate anti-Federation antagonist. They do not negotiate and you cannot surrender. But the fundamental difference is that the Borg are not a race. They're not a civilization. They're an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. While the Gorn are parasitic, the closer analogy for the Borg would be a virus. They spread and collect and consume anything in their path. They're robot zombies. And that is just a fundamentally different threat from another civilization. A virus can be stopped, it can be quarantined, and since the Borg do have a consciousness, they can actually be negotiated with. Just ask Janeway. The Borg don't need to assimilate people, they just want to. A parasite needs its host to survive. The Gorn biologically can't stop kidnapping and murdering people, at least not that we've seen so far, which means that there is no option for peace. If we don't want to become food, we have to strike first. The only way you can beat a parasite is to kill it or to starve it, and that's fine when we're talking about a bug, but we're talking about a civilization, and suddenly words like genocide start floating around. I mean, for God's sake, they invented guns specifically for killing Gorn, something that a previous show this year specifically called out as immoral.
Perhaps there's a way we can exploit that uniqueness.
You mean fashion a weapon against them?
Yes, or at the very least a tool to identify and root them out.
So what's your moral dilemma?
The solution may be biological, and targeting a species on biology alone is tantamount to genocide.
The new phaser settings work.
There's a lot to nitpick about this season finale, like basically everything to do with Chapel and the millions of coincidences and conveniences that mean she's the only person alive on the Cayuga. Seriously, there's so many ways you could have explained this. There was a lag in the transporter, and the random energy surge causes her to appear on the ship a day late when everyone's dead. She sealed herself in the surgical bay when the ship came apart. She used that super serum thing to tank the explosion. Literally any explanation is better than her just waking up in the hallway next to all the dead people. But there is a moment in there that for a brief second gave me a hope that something interesting was about to happen. Chapel is walking through the halls and hears someone trying to access a command panel. She thinks it's Spock because he happened to glide past her window in the most convenient way possible, but it turns out it's actually a Gorn, the first fully adult Gorn we've seen in the series. And I thought, aha, we're doing a Geordi and the Romulan thing, where these two enemies are going to have to work together in order to survive, and we'll see that there is some level of intelligence and some level of empathy to the Gorn after all. And then they just have a big punch-up with it on the bridge and Spock stabs it in the face with a bit of metal. Why even bother? What was this guy doing on the ship in the first place? The opportunities for storytelling with this Gorn are endless. Maybe he's there looking for survivors. Maybe he sabotaged the ship but wasn't able to escape. Maybe he's a defector. Or maybe he's just a boss fight so that there can be some action for this part of the episode where we need a fight scene. Because even as a fully grown adult in a spacesuit, these Gorn are nothing more than big snarling monsters. Maybe you're okay with this. Maybe you like it. Maybe you think it makes Star Trek more realistic. Space is infinitely vast. Why would it be the case that we can all live harmoniously together if we just try hard enough? But what I want to know is why. The point of including an enemy like this is to ask the question, what do our heroes do when posed with this situation? But the question is only interesting if the answer is satisfying. And if the answer is immediately expose themselves as a bunch of hypocrites, then I don't see how that's a very satisfying answer. Strange New Worlds rightly gets a lot of praise for bringing hope and optimism back to Star Trek after the dismal cynicism that was the early Discovery and Picard seasons. But all of that goes completely out of the window whenever the Gorn show up. One question I keep coming back to is, why the Gorn? Of all the races in Star Trek, why choose the Gorn? I get that they wanted to flesh out a fairly underused race, but if you're going to change them so much that their original appearance no longer makes any sense whatsoever, then why even bother? Strange New Worlds has a complicated relationship to the wider Star Trek universe. As a prequel to the show from the 60s, it takes a ton of liberties that I don't really care about, like the sets and the costumes and the redefining of old characters. But for whatever reason, it's the Gorn that feels too far for me. Arena, despite being a meme, is one of my favourite episodes of TOS, so much that I've made a whole video about it, and if you're trying to view TOS as a sequel to Strange New Worlds, then this episode is just total nonsense now. In the original episode, it's clear that nobody had ever seen the Gorn before, even though they obviously have. Spock literally stabbed one in the face. And if they did know, why would they build a colony on the edge of Gorn space given what happens whenever they do that? Why wasn't there a jamming tower on Cestus 3? Where are all the Gorn babies on Cestus 3? How does this Gorn captain not instantly annihilate an unarmed Captain Kirk? But more important than lore is how it completely ruins the point of the original episode. Sometimes a monster isn't just a monster, even a seemingly irredeemable action can have its reasons. If you can learn to empathise with the enemy, then maybe one day they can become your friends. Peace with the Gorn may be difficult, they're violent, brutal, and strike before asking questions, but through empathy, through mercy, maybe it might be possible someday. I'm making this not knowing how the Season 2 cliffhanger will be resolved. It's entirely possible that it will end in a peaceful solution. Maybe La'an will hug a Gorn and they'll discover the power of friendship. It's a distinct possibility. But if it does, I just don't see how they can wrangle that into a satisfying conclusion. Maybe that says something about my lack of imagination, but when you write an enemy that doesn't make sense to ask a question with no satisfying answer, the only winning move is not to play. I guess all that remains to be said for now is to be continued. Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for all your support. If you'd like to see your name up here or get access to exclusive Patreon videos, please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me. Or if you can't manage that, then you could very least like, comment, share, and subscribe. That would also be very helpful. If you want more Gorn content, because somehow I've made 2 full videos about the Gorn now, then you can find the original Gorn video up here. Or if you're looking for more thoughts on Strange New Worlds, then you can check out this video about tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.